And welcome back. We are now going to go ahead and dive right into our next topic, which is that of strings. Now, we have already seen strings up to this point, but we haven't really given it a formal name. So with that being said, let's dive right into it. So remember when we used our print line statements, let's say system.out.println hello world. These, of course, were print line statements that we had things be written to our console. If we use the hello world example, of course, it displayed the message hello world. Pretty self-explanatory. Anything inside those quotations, it would spit back out at us. Now, the text that is being displayed, the hello world, is an example of what is called a string. And the best way to think about a string is it's a collection of characters. All right, you think of it as like a word or a phrase, maybe multiple words or phrases. So it's the best way, again, is a collection of characters. That's the best way for us to define what a string is here in Java. Now, in this case, the string is simply just whatever's inside that quotation mark. So if we had that, say, hello universe, the quotation marks would then make it print hello universe. Though, as we will see here very quickly, we don't necessarily have this only happen with inside of print line statements. There are other ways to use strings with inside of Java. Now, if we can use strings in other ways, that means they probably operate in similar ways to things we've seen before. So if we look at how to declare a string, that means that this is going to be very similar to something we've already discussed, which is that of variables. Now, they're declared in the exact same kind of format, but in here we have a type of string. So with a variable, it'd be type name equals a value. All right, so strings are still following that same rule. The type is string, the name is just whatever the name of the string is, and then we set equal to some value. Here we have an example. I have string message. All right, string, of course, is being the type. Message is being the name. Now you notice I didn't set it equal to something because just like with variables, we don't have to have it set equal to something right away. We can, but sometimes there are times when we don't want it to equal something right away. And if you note in the example above, the string is not initialized, right? It doesn't have a value. Well, we can do that in another line of code. We can come by later and say, you know what? I want message to equal, I need to speak with you. All right, and you notice the key thing here is that with message, we have these quotations. Just like when we did our print line statement and we said like hello world and we had put hello world in quotations, the same thing is happening here. You'll notice we have an opening quotation and a closing quotation. So it's very important when we do this that those quotation marks are there. And additionally, you'll notice is that the semicolon that is on the end here is always going to be after the closing quotation. So if you try to put that semicolon before the quotation, you're going to get a syntax error. So you got to make sure that whenever you have a quote for a string, that those quotes are always being opened and closed, or else again, you're going to get a syntax error. Now, just like with variables, we can declare and assign a string within a single statement. So instead of saying string message and then message equals I need to speak with you, I could have come by and said string message equals I need to speak with you. And of course, you'll notice this follows the same rule that we had with variables. Type name equals a value. So they are still following kind of that same format. Now, we can also display the value of a string using system.out.println, as we've already seen. All right, we can put it directly in quotes, but just like with variables, I can put that value into the print line statement. So system.out.println message, if I were to run that, it's going to say, I need to speak with you. Notice I did not type out in quotes, I need to speak with you. Instead, I simply just put the name of the string in the print line statement, and that name is what's going to tell Java, look at what that string is and print it out. Just like if I had a int num1 equals 2, and I said system.out.println num1, it's going to print out 2. The same thing is happening here with strings. Now, one thing I want to kind of caution you here is that outputting a string is not necessarily the same as outputting a numeric value. All right. If you notice, strings are a little different. Every time we talk about ints, doubles, floats, all those things, they all are lowercase. But if you notice with the string types, they're in uppercase. And that's because Java treats those a little differently. We're going to talk about why that is in our next lesson. But just know for now, there's a little bit of a difference. All right, strings and numeric values are not the same things here in Java. In some of the class languages, they have a lot more similarities. But here in Java, they are treated as two different entities. So for example, if I output the string with a value, let's say 10.5, because I can have a string equal a numeric value. So if I had, let's say, string value equals 10.5, and 10.5 is in quotes, and then I had another one, let's say double value, and that one is 10.5. All right, you'll notice that those are not the same. All right, and we'll see that here in an example here in just a second. These are not the same things. If we try to use, for example, one of these in an operation, we're going to very, very quickly see that only one of these is going to yield the expected result. So, for example, let's say I take 10.5 and I want to add to it 2.5. Which one of these do you think is going to actually give the numeric value? Well, 10.5 plus 2.5 we know should give us 13. But if we have those go together with a string, is it going to be the same as if we do it with a double? Again, these are things to keep in mind. All right, so we're over here in Eclipse, and let's just go ahead and see how this is all going to kind of come together. So, making a string, type name equals value. So let's just say string, and let's just go ahead and say this is name equals, and let's just say it's, quote, Bob, and let's just give him a last name, George. All right, so Bob George is his name, and let's just say we want to print that. So, of course, just like before, we could do system.out.println of Bob George, right? We can print that directly. And of course, that is a string that is being printed out to the console here. But if I were to do this instead and say system.out.println and have that instead print the value name, we should get it to say Bob George. Now notice I did not put quotes around name here, all right? Just like with variables, if I put quotes around this, it's going to print out exactly whatever is inside of those quotations. So notice even with a string variable here, with the string value, you notice that it does not have quotations. So if I just go ahead and run this real quick, you'll see we get Bob George and Bob George. All right, so both of those are the same thing. However, this string, of course, I had to write into my quotations. This string is set here with the value of name. And this is actually going to be a lot more helpful as we move forward and we start wanting to do more things with these strings. Sometimes we still want to have messages here inside of a println statement. And so this is still very useful to have. But a lot of times we might have a string that's going to contain those values for us, which is going to, of course, be very helpful. Now, I did mention, of course, that strings and numeric values are different things. So let me just go ahead and create up two new strings. So let's just say string, and I'm going to say number equals 10.5. And of course, if you notice, if I try putting it just like this, all right, you'll see I get an error. Because again, what do strings need to have around them? They need to have quotation marks. So I'm just going to go ahead, add those quotation marks on in here. And you'll see that it's happy now. It's not being angry about it because, again, it has a quotation mark. And if I say double value equals, let's say, 10.5, all right, remember, this is a double. It's a primitive type. It does not need quotations. Only strings need quotations. Now, of course, I could do a system.out.println of both of these. And let's just say number. And let's do system.out.println of value. And if I were to run these, we would, of course, expect them to say the same thing. So from the console perspective here, from the end user, these two things are the same. However, as we are going to see here in our practice here, these are not the same thing. So for example, if I were to say, let's just say I want to do value plus 2, right? So I come in here and say value plus, I think we had talked about doing 2.5. All right, if I do value plus 2.5, you'll see we get 13.0. But what's going to happen if I come in here and I add 2.5 here? What is that going to do? So I'm going to say add 2.5. All right, number plus 2.5. What is that going to do? Well, if I run this, a very curious thing is going to happen. And you'll notice we don't get 13. I got 10.52.5. Now, there's a reason for that, and that's because this, again, is a string and not a numeric type. And we're going to talk about this in a later lesson about why this is happening. What is this actually doing here that this is happening? But this is an important thing to kind of note about why this is. So if I don't want this to happen, obviously, I'm going to need to use the double type here to get the answer that I want. But that should give us a nice quick introduction to strings. Again, we're going to be able to pull this apart a little bit more in the coming lessons about what a string actually is, what we can do with it, why is it a little different in Java, and also about why did we get that kind of weird behavior that we just saw when we tried to add on a numeric value.